We got to build a ton of new homes. And here's why. We are literally looking at a country where we're about 3.7 million homes short of meeting basic supply. And that supply is extraordinarily expensive. If we look at median income, it's really been pretty flat. On the other hand, during this same period, over the last 25 plus years, the normal house price has gone up 6 times. Now it costs 6 times the amount of your average income to buy a house. At the same time, we've seen that the number of housing starts have cratered, up and down a little bit, but overall down. And if you thought, well, I can't afford a house, well, maybe at least I can rent. Well, I gotta tell you, renting doesn't cut it either, because unfortunately we've seen rental inflation go up dramatically. So what do we gotta do? Well, we gotta introduce legislation. And candidly, I've introduced a ton of bipartisan legislation that can get this problem solved. Let's start. First of all, not even at the federal level, we need state and local governments to cut out some of the unnecessary and burdensome red tape. It shouldn't cost tens of thousands of dollars to get your house permitted and take forever. We really need to encourage to work with our local partners to make that happen fast. Second, there are a series of tools of the federal government that we can use. One of the most important is the traditional called LIHTC, the Affordable Housing Credit. We've got an act here that would increase this already proven tool dramatically. This would add about 1.5 million new houses if we could get this passed. At the same time, we've found that there are a number of communities where you've got aging housing stock. You know, we've seen communities where 1 or 2 blighted houses on a street might bring down the overall value of all the houses on the street. Yet if we could find a way to either rebuild a house or build a new one there, where you've already got water and sewer and broadband, you can bring down the cost. Well, that's where the Neighborhood Home Investment Act, again, bipartisan, that I've introduced. In addition to this legislation, there's another tool that we've had that goes back to President Clinton's time, the New Markets Tax Credit. Again, this is a piece of legislation that needs to be updated, bipartisan, that could, again, add to housing supply. Recognizing as well that a lot of housing comes in historic communities, we need to take the already existing historic tax credits and expand them. Right over here, Historic Tax Credit Act. Sometimes we think about historic tax credits in cities and suburban areas, but the truth is, heck of a lot of historic structures all across rural America, and they've not gotten their fair share. So working with Senator Capito, Republican Senator from West Virginia, we've introduced the Rural Historic Tax Credit Act that would make sure those rural communities get access to rebuilding and preserving these wonderful historic structures. At the same time, we've got to also address not only housing supply, but we've also got to address, unfortunately, the racial wealth gap in this country. I've introduced, I think, a creative idea called the LIFT Act that would say if you're a first-generation, first-time home buyer and you qualify for a 30-year mortgage, we'll provide you a 20-year mortgage, which would literally double the amount of equity you'd have in that house after 10 years. I think this is a very exciting idea. It takes on an issue that oftentimes is talked about, but nobody comes up with a solution. And finally, all this legislation, important, but if the overall cost of materials keeps going up, then all this legislation isn't going to get the job done. We've got to repeal the Trump tariffs. You think about the cost of lumber, drywall. Where does a lot of that come from? Canada, Mexico, other nations. These Trump tariffs are dramatically driving up the actual construction costs because of the materials that go in. Together, we can actually take on this housing shortage in our country. We can build and rehab existing housing. We can give some exciting new incentives to create new houses, not only in urban communities, but again, think about those rural historic areas that could be revitalized as well. This problem is critical, and that's why I'm fighting for you in the halls of Congress, in terms of trying to convince my friends at local government to cut out some of the red tape, to end these crazy Trump tariffs that drives up the cost of building materials. I can't think of anything more important than making the idea of owning a house a reality for every American. We need a ton of new homes, and I'm fighting every day to make that a reality.